Nietzsche's negative critique of Platonism and the human rational capacity was of strident force and was something at the time of incomparability to any other philosophical inquiry. In this video, which is the first in the Twilight of the Idols video series, I will most specifically be talking about chapter 3 called Reason in Philosophy. Make sure to visit thoughtsonthinking.org where you can find and join our close-knit union of thinkers and to sign up to our newsletter. Nietzsche begins by bringing into light what he calls the idiosyncrasies of philosophers. He outlines that the philosophers of the past, most specifically those of the Platonists, hated history, that they followed the mantra of mummification, that they took honour in dehistoricizing the past, most specifically conceptualizing the history of mankind, that they killed anything living and stuffed all that was a past living force with conceptual ideas of man which are of a believed highest degree. What he is specifically attacking here is the refutation of the senses and the hatred surrounding the idea of becoming. The past philosophers, such as the likes of Plato, as I give example in this video, only believed in a metaphysics of being, that things themselves are causes of themselves. I quote, "What is does not become. What becomes is not." End quote. This is what you would call the Platonic forms. Nietzsche did not believe in this doctrine of thought because he believed in the senses and that things were always becoming, passing, changing, appearing, and growing, unlike the Platonic perspective, which believed in higher degrees of perfection, unity, and duration, the immovable metaphysical forms of godly nature. In part 2, Nietzsche gives high respect for Heraclitus, the philosopher who did not step into the crowd of agreement, but one who admired in the concept of becoming. Heraclitus rejected the evidence presented when being tried to show things as if possessed by duration and unity, even when the senses themselves show a reality of plurality and change. As for the quote, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man." End quote. Nietzsche concludes that the philosophers of the past would place an immoral stamp on the senses as being those which would deceive mankind. Nietzsche concludes that it is the evidence of reason which pounds the objections from the senses into oblivion. It is reason itself as the cause for our falsification for the evidence of the senses, thus it is what we make our conscious reasoning faculty which bring upon the lie of unity, duration, etc. Being is therefore an empty fiction. It is made up. We and everything else are constantly becoming, never being itself with other perfect forms of existence. I quote, "The apparent world is the only one. The real world has only been lyingly added." End quote. Nietzsche praises the sciences for accepting the evidence given by the senses as valid and worthwhile, and how such abilities are of an extreme delicate tool, which no philosopher has ever given gratitude or respect. The not yet sciences of those which lie in abortion for Nietzsche are those of metaphysics, theology, psychology, and epistemology. He also denigrates a logic and the applied logic of mathematics as those whereby, I quote, "reality does not appear." End quote. Overall, by this point we can see how the senses are of extreme importance for Nietzsche, not only as being of a human capacity, but of those which can only allow the true expression of reality itself, and how any other conjurings of the busy, reasoning and logical brain do not represent anything that lie in the domain of truth, nature or reality. Nietzsche in chapter 4 brings up another idiosyncrasy from the philosophers of the past. Instead of mummifying the history of man with concept and casting the senses as unreality and immoral, they also make the crucial mistake of mistaking the last for the first. This simply means placing the highest concepts at the beginning as the beginning. Nietzsche relates this to religion, saying that they only do this to give and express reverence, that the highest must not be allowed to grow out of the lower, must not have allowed to grow at all, that it is only moral if the highest first ranks of concept must only be the cause of itself, or the causa sui. This is where Nietzsche links Platonic concepts, which neglect the senses, to the idea of God, that God, being those specific high-ranking concepts, are causes of themselves, and therefore the most real being of all. I quote, moral. Everything of the first rank must be causa sui. All supreme values are of the first rank. All supreme concepts, that which is the unconditioned, the good, the true, the perfect, all that cannot have become, must therefore be causa sui. But neither can these supreme concepts be incommensurate with one another, be incompatible with one another. Thus they acquired their stupendous concept, God. End quote. Due to this disbelief in the idea of becoming, due to the belief of being, and due to the rational convulsion over the acknowledgement of the senses, did we come to the concept of God worship, the belief of purity and perfection. In this section, Nietzsche blames our language as being an error which misleads us into thinking we have contact with a higher world. Nietzsche blames language because not only does it belong in rudimentary psychology, which believes in the idea of will and ego as cause, which he rejects by the way, but also because the metaphysics of language is based on reason. To simply explain, the main problem Nietzsche has in relation to language is that it calls to mind its metaphysics, which is that of reason. The problem with reason is that the person with reason, as of all of us, believe that the will or ego is its own cause, because we believe we have our own autonomy, which is basically the question of free will. And this is what Nietzsche is very skeptical about, because he is a biological determinist. Thus, I quote, "In the ego as being, in the ego as substance, and which projects its belief in the ego substance onto all things. Only thus does it create the concept thing. Being is everywhere, thought in, foisted on, as cause. It is only from the conception ego that there follows the concept being." When he brings up that ego is creator of the concept thing, it is very interesting and is something better talked about in another chapter from this book. But for Nietzsche right now, the great fatal error in this case is the idea, I quote, that the will is something which produces an effect, that will is faculty, end quote. To clarify, this really boils down to this fundamental core problem. Will as cause is a fallacy for Nietzsche because he doesn't believe in free will, and this belief in will as cause for past philosophers has made many philosophers live under a delusion of thought according to Nietzsche. This delusion of free will or will as cause has made past philosophers, according to Nietzsche, believe in the ability to reason, which is to conceptualize and create high-ranking thought, which leads to the denigration and validity of the senses, and thus to view all in the world as being and not becoming. This belief in reason and will to cause for Nietzsche allowed philosophers of the past to believe in the Platonic forms of perfection, and that reason itself, because it is not empirical, has been ordained to us by a higher being, or that we originate from transcendence itself. Therefore, language for Nietzsche causes us to think we are in contact with a higher being because we believe in will as cause, ego as being, and reason being associated with it, and being part of language itself. To Nietzsche, this idea is all a load of baloney, because he is a biological determinist, and rejects the Platonic philosophy of being over becoming. In another video on this book series, I will dig into it a bit more of why he doesn't believe in free will or will as cause. In the end of this section, Nietzsche writes the following, which solidifies his view on language linked to reason, will as cause, and God, saying, I quote, "I fear we are not becoming rid of God because we still believe in grammar." End quote. In the final section, Nietzsche writes out a compressed conclusion in 4 propositions. I will read this out to end. Proposition 1. The grounds upon which this world has been designated as apparent establish rather its reality. Another kind of reality is absolutely undemonstratable. Proposition 2. The characteristics of which have assigned to the real being of things are the characteristics of non-being, of nothingness. The real world has been constructed out of the contradiction to the actual world. Proposition 3. To talk about another world, then this is quite pointless. Proposition 4. To divide the world into a real and an apparent world, whether in the manner of Christianity or in the manner of Kant, is only a suggestion of decadence, a symptom of declining life. That the artist places a higher value on appearance than on reality constitutes no objection to this proposition, for appearance here signifies reality once more, only selected, strengthened, and corrected. The tragic artist is not a pessimist. It is precisely he who affirms all that is questionable and terrible in existence. He is Dionysian." End quote. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below to get involved in the discussion. Talking about discussion, you can find a link to the new Thoughts on Thinking Facebook group down below, so make sure to join if you want to get involved in conversations about philosophy, sociology, psychology, and literature. Thoughtsonthinking.org is the place where you want to go if you want to find links to all my other associations. Make sure to follow my social medias such as Instagram and Twitter to keep up to date with everything that is going on, and also Patreon, where you can donate a minimum of $2. Lastly, a quick shout out to my patrons. Thank you to Danielle Kazmi, The Truthism, Noah, Shahad, John, Richard, and Bijham for supporting me on Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I will speak to you in the next video.